Well, good evening and welcome to another Workers' Party X Space called The Doctor with Dr Bob Gill. We've got quite a bit to talk about this evening, Bob, and obviously we would welcome any contributions from our listeners. But I know we spoke about the junior doctors or the resident doctor strike last week, but I mean, it's still very current, isn't it? And we've heard the Prime Minister now saying it's beyond belief or something that the doctors could consider going on strike, coming on top of Wes Streeting's outburst last year when I think he accused them of being juvenile delinquents or something. But just give us an update, will you, Bob, on what the latest is in regards to the doctors' strike going forward.
Yeah, so as far as I'm aware, the strike is still on, due to start middle of next week. You're right, Wes Streeting's making lots of accusations and making patronising comments to the doctors in terms of laying on the pressure, why they're doing it this time of year, we're combating a super flu. But, you know, it's all a bit of a pretext to use it as a doctor-bashing opportunity. In terms of the super flu, we touched on that last week. And, you know, the Department of Health's own figures show that actually this season is not that much different to every year, and they seem to be really exaggerating the threat to pile on the pressure, and just for political purposes, it seems to me.
Yeah. What do you make of Keir Starmer's, or should I say Sir Keir Starmer's comment that he said it's frankly, just to quote him, frankly beyond belief that the resident doctors would strike during the NHS's worst moment since the pandemic. And he says that the NHS and patients who need it would be in grave danger. What do you make of that remark?
Well, I'd say, frankly, it's beyond belief that this government hasn't managed to resolve the issue with restoring doctors' pay, particularly as we've got a recruitment and morale crisis. So the person with all the power to resolve this problem is just pointing the finger elsewhere, which is typical of Starmer. I think he's got to be one of the most deeply unpopular prime ministers in this country's history. And I'm quite confident to say anything that comes out of his mouth won't really land with much power because he's totally discredited.
Yeah. What do you make of the BMA's comment, the British Medical Association? I mean, they're saying that, I guess you would agree with this, but they're saying that the government should not be scaremongering and making the public think that to quote them again, the NHS will not be able to look after them and their loved ones. Is that a fair comment?
Absolutely. You know, politicians like to scaremonger to achieve an objective. But as I've said, they're exaggerating the consequences of the flu, the seasonal flu. And, you know, there have been multiple strikes now, and they'll just have to follow the procedure where emergency care has to be conducted safely and other care postponed. But let's not forget, the majority of people languishing on waiting lists and, you know, requiring treatment they're not getting is down to consecutive governments cutting capacity and problems with workforce capacity as well, not down to the strikes. The strikes overall have quite a small impact on the waiting list for routine and elective surgery and treatment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Jack Fletcher, the chair of the BMA, said that he would meet Streeting at any time to try to agree a deal to avert the strikes, and said it was cruel and calculated for the Health Secretary to fail to have an engagement with outside the strikes, and then come to the BMA with an offer that he knows is poor and expects them to just accept it within 24 hours. I mean, you know, it is a bit of kind of moral blackmail, isn't it, that the Health Secretary is trying on against the resident doctors?
Yeah, I think these tactics just demonstrate bad faith. You know, we have a Starmer government which is continuing on the legacy of previous administrations, and ultimately they are not concerned with patient care, patient safety, and the quality of service provision. So, you know, to say that they're worried about the impact of the strikes is disingenuous because the rest of their policy flow damages patient care. This is totally inconsistent.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we've spoken about in previous episodes, isn't it, Bob? That the government are definitely speaking with forked tongue in relation, to this dispute. And I think one of your frustrations is that the BMA should be really speaking out about some of the reforms that the government is bringing in, which is actually leading to the difficulties that the NHS is experiencing. I know we've sort of gone through that before, and apologies to people who may have heard Bob speak about this, but I do think given this is still such a current issue, it is well worth just sort of rehearsing some of those points that you previously made, Bob, and any other new ones that you might want to make in relation to the background really to this strike in terms of what they're doing to the National Health Service, which has kind of got us to the situation that we're in at the moment.
Well, there was another article in the Telegraph this week which highlighted the fact that surgeons are spending their time not operating purely because of the endemic dysfunction within the NHS, be that due to lack of theatre space, be that due to dilapidation of surgical facilities, or down to lack of suitably qualified staff. These are all ongoing, entrenched problems that exist within the NHS, and to imply that the junior doctors strike or, the way the junior doctors are interacting with government are chiefly responsible is totally to miss the impact of the privatisation, which is deliberately reduced capacity, caused wage stagnation and deep dissatisfaction amongst the workforce, and a brain drain out of the NHS, which compounds these problems that the government have created, alongside the misdirection of funding to service private finance initiative debt and to run the market within the NHS, which is outsourcing more and more services.
Yeah. I want to come back to that in a minute, Bob, if I may. I just want to stick with some of the other comments that Keir Starmer made to get your reaction to them. He's also on record as saying, I am a Labour Prime Minister who believes in workers' rights to strike, would you believe? But then he goes on to say, but let's be clear, when it comes to the strikes planned by resident doctors next week, they should not happen. They are reckless. And again, it's this kind of, putting the blame on the doctors, putting the ball squarely in their court, rather than taking responsibility for the situation that they're responsible for in terms of the background to why the doctors have ended up going on strike. And obviously, part of that is what you've just been talking about there. But how do you respond to that remark from the Prime Minister? He says he's in favour of the workers' rights to strike, except when it comes to them taking strike action, it seems.
Well, it seems to me he's competing with Donald Trump in terms of how many contradictions he can get out in a public statement. These are completely conflicting ideas that he's trying to put across, that he's a workers' prime minister, yet he disregards the workers. He hasn't listened to the workers. The tactics Wes Streeting's employing by non-engagement and then giving ultimatums and deadlines for negotiation, this does not strike me as a government at all interested in improving workers' terms and conditions or the respect with which they are treated.
They don't strike me, Bob, I've got to say, as a particularly Labour-oriented government. And I know whenever there's been a Labour government in the past, there have been disagreements with the trade union movement on various issues from time to time. But by and large, broadly speaking, even under Blair's era, I mean, and I was pushing it a bit, but even under his era, I think, with things like the minimum wage being brought in and so on, kind of were broadly on the same. Remember, we were struggling a little bit with Blair, let's be honest, but we were broadly on the same page. But now it seems that they are totally at odds with the trade union movement. So I know the BMA, British Medical Association, isn't affiliated to the Labour Party, but a lot of unions are still affiliated to the party. I know the Bakers Union disaffiliated some time ago. The train drivers union did look at possibly disaffiliating, but they apparently voted not to do so. And I think similarly with the Fire Brigade union, who got thrown out a while ago. And I remember when I was a shadow minister trying to persuade the Fire Brigade union to re-affiliate, and couldn't persuade them until Jeremy Corbyn came along as the leader, and then Matt Rack, who was the General Secretary at the time, he led the charge to get the union to re-affiliate at that point in time. But when I approached the FBU about disaffiliating, now the Labour Party's gone in such a kind of negative trajectory in relation to the trade unions, they were sort of resistant. This is a fire union as well. We're still resistant to disaffiliating when the party's much more kind of anti-trade union, much more right wing than ever it was under Ed Miliband, when they were. We couldn't sort of persuade them to affiliate to the Labour Party at that time. So I don't know what your thoughts. I know it's not strictly speaking to do with the NHS, but what's your thoughts about trade unions who continue to subscribe to the Labour Party, actually give them, basically bankroll them and remain affiliated to them?
Yeah, it's a pretty hard position to defend. The trade unions, unfortunately, I think, have undergone the same transformation as the Labour Party. They've drifted to the right. They've accepted neoliberal ideology. Unfortunately, most of the leaders are pretty weak. We know that Sharon Graham, the leader of the Unite Union, Unite refused to even allow screenings of documentaries.
Lost you, Bob.
Hold on, let me just. Hopefully, you still got my audio.
Yeah, I got your audio, mate.
Yeah. So Sharon Graham, refused to allow Unite buildings to be used to screen documentaries favourable to the struggles that Jeremy Corbyn had. So their actions haven't really resembled anything like the unions I remember growing up back in the 70s. So they have sort of weakened their stance in terms of protecting workers' rights, as have the Labour Party. They're in service to big capital. We know that Starmer and Rachel Reeves and others have had meetings with the head of BlackRock, Larry Fink, so that they are servicing the billionaire class, the capital class, and just paying lip service to looking after workers.
Yeah, I mean, and we know, you might want to say something about this as well, Bob, that some of the leading figures in the Labour government are very close to the private healthcare industry, and I believe have received contributions from them, haven't they?
Absolutely. So Wes Streeting is a significant figure who's received funding from those who have interests in private healthcare, as has Starmer. I mentioned earlier Larry Fink and BlackRock. They are known to have interests in. They've invested everywhere. Most parts of the economy are subject to investments by BlackRock, and healthcare is no exception. So, if you're receiving money from the private health industry, they want a return on their investment, and the return on investment is to carry on with the privatization.
Yeah, and I remember many moons ago, Harold Macmillan, former Tory grandee, former Tory Prime Minister in the late 1950s, may have been into the early 1960s as well, railing against Margaret Thatcher, selling, as he put it, selling off the family silver. Well, I mean, that's continued, or it did continue under Blair and Brown, and it's accelerating, turbocharged, isn't it, now, with this shower of so-called Labour politicians that are in government at the moment.
Yeah, so the general trend is to mould every element of the economy, whether it be totally private or publicly funded, to shift it and mould it into something that can provide a profit stream for some private corporation or the other. And healthcare has been turned into a corporate cash cow. And every reform or idea that they put forward, you just have to ask yourself a simple question: who's going to be extracting a profit out of this?
Yeah.
Because the whole idea of public service was to remove the profit idea from the service provision, remove any chance for perverse incentives, and provide it in the most efficient way possible, particularly when it's a natural monopoly like rail, water, the utilities, and healthcare is a natural monopoly. We've discussed in earlier episodes that you don't go around shopping for health provision.
No.
If you're involved in an accident, you're not going to do a Google search on the best A&E department. You want to go to the nearest A&E department, having full confidence that it is staffed by competent doctors and nurses who know what they're doing, who aren't overtired, who aren't working in overstretched departments, and have confidence that you're in a safe pair of hands. Well, that is what is being removed. The private sector is not interested in emergency care. The private sector isn't interested in unprofitable care. And that's why the public sector and the NHS was formed in the first place.
Yeah, of course.
Before 1948, you had a total mixture of provision. If you were rich, you didn't have much difficulty. If you were dirt poor, you had no access. And if you were lucky, you might end up in a charitable hospital. But so many people went without treatment and suffered the burden of disease, and life was getting so terrible. Many of them ended up terminating their own lives because of the fear of suffering and also being a burden to their family, which the NHS removed.
Yes, absolutely, of course. And well, you don't have to be a dyed-in-the-wool socialist either, I think, to acknowledge the sorts of services that you just listed there. Healthcare, obviously, being at the top of the list, but healthcare, water, sewage, rail, energy, etc. It's far better being provided by the public sector, which is devoted, or should be devoted entirely to delivering public service, rather than the private sector, whose overriding priority is making money. I was interested. I was listening to an interesting podcast yesterday, I think it was, with Steve King, the economist Steve King, heterodox economist, really good guy. Spoke actually at the Workers' Party National Members Council earlier in the year, I think in September.